Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. My name is Harun Shahid Bashir, and today I'm going to present my project paper, which is on the critical assessment of Tawarruq in Islamic banking. So, looking at the structure of my project paper, I'm going to start off with introduction, then look into my research objectives of this project paper. Then I will compare the classical Tawarruq and organized Tawarruq, and look into the legal concepts and foundations of Tawarruq in Islamic jurisprudence. Then look at the issues highlighted in organized tawarruq and how organized tawarruq is actually used in modern Islamic banking. And then we look at some of the recommendations on how tawarruq can be improved, and the alternatives to organized tawarruq for personal financing. And I will close this presentation with some concluding remarks. So, before we dive into, we must understand what tawarruq is. So, tawarruq originates from the root word warik, which relates to silver minted coins. It is a mode of acquiring liquidity without indulging in interest-based loans. So there are two categories of tawarruq. One is called the classical or fiqhi tawarruq, and then the other is called the organized tawarruq. So in the modern Islamic banking of today, organized tawarruq is the pretty much the dominant structure that is being used. So the research objectives of this project paper is to look into the legal concepts and foundations of tawarruq in Islamic jurisprudence, and then we'll do an analysis of the application and structure of tawarruq in its current form, which is being used in Islamic banking. And then we'll also discuss some of the recommendations of how tawarruq can be improved, and the need to look for alternative and better products. So to understand the concept of tawarruq, how tawarruq works, is to understand that tawarruq is a way on how a person acquires liquidity, and that is done through the purchase of a commodity on deferred payment basis, and then the sales of that commodity to a third party. So the differences between organized and classical tawarruq mainly lies in how this sale and purchase of the commodity is being done. So in the classical form, the person who's acquiring liquidity, he has to basically find the seller and find the buyer of the commodity, and he has to do the entire process. However, in the case of organized tawarruq, which is being practiced today, usually there's an intermediary, which is the Islamic financial institution, which will help the customer to sort of do some pre-arrangement on the buying and selling of the commodities, and then they will act as agents to assist the customer. So the customer does not need to take possession of the commodity, and he's not really involved in sort of the purchase and the sale of the commodity. However, in the case of fiqhi or classical tawarruq, because there is no intermediary, the customer has to manage the sale and the purchase himself, and then he also has to take possession of the commodity. Um, so when we look at the legal foundation of tawarruq in Islamic jurisprudence, we see that looking at the primary sources of Sharia, the Quran and Sunnah, so there is no direct mention of tawarruq. However, some of the hadiths do mention inner transactions. So in the case of inner transactions, it is similar to the tawarruq. However, the one key difference is that in tawarruq, we are selling the commodity back to a third party. However, in a sale, this is done to the same party from which the commodity was initially purchased from. So over the years, a lot of the scholars, they have given fatwas and developed a legal standing on classical tawarruq use and organized tawarruq use. So if we see across the different schools of law, generally all of the schools of law are in agreement of classical tawarruq, so it is regarded as permissible. However, in the case of organized tawarruq, the schools of law, they differ. Only the Shafi school basically permits the use of organized tawarruq. However, the other schools, they regard it as either disliked or prohibited. And if you look at the recent sort of discussions of scholars and fiqh bodies, we look at OIC Fiqh Academy, which gave a judgment on Tawarruq, where it regarded classical tawarruk as permitted. However, the organized tabarruk was regarded as impermissible and likened it to riba. Similarly, IOFI permits the use of classical tabarruk, but it also permits the use of organized tabarruk, but it has set some certain conditions and regulations on how organized tabarruk should be conducted for it to be actually permissible. So, what are the issues that the scholars usually highlight, in which organized tabarruk can create issues? So, one of the issues is that it really is not aligned with maqasid al-Sharia. So, the transactions of tabarruk, they are sort of synthetic transactions. They don't produce any real economic activity. There is no intention to buy or sell the commodity. The intention is to gain liquidity. So it really ignores the objectives of the Sharia of like risk sharing, genuine trade, genuine economic activity, and also a lot of the scholars, including Mufti Taqi Usmani, they have not only criticized organized tawarruk, but they have also likened it to interest-bearing loans, and they have regarded the use of organized tawarruk as a legal stratagem to circumvent the riba, prohibition. And furthermore, from an economic point of view, excessive use of organized tawarruk, creates a lot of excessive debt in the society, and it leads to sort of over excessive consumption. And you can compare it to like the conventional system, where it also promotes debt and overconsumption. So um, it really defeats the purpose of, again, maqasid al-Sharia, which promotes risk sharing and real genuine economic activity. So if you look at the current applications of organized tawarruk in modern Islamic banking, there are two main applications. So one of the applications is to meet the interbank liquidity demands, and the other application is to provide financing, for the banking customers. And in both of the cases, the main objective is to gain liquidity, and generally the purchase and sale of the commodities is done at an exchange, and this could be like a London Metal Exchange, or it could be, especially for Malaysia, it is the Bursa Sukul Sila. And there are some issues related to how the commodities are being sold on, for example, on London Metal Exchange, because trading on such exchanges, it doesn't really involve commodity possession. Most of the time, the change of ownership is done, on paper. There is no real delivery of the commodity, and also the purchase of the commodity. It is sort of difficult to verify, like the quality of the commodity, where the commodity exists. So there are certain sort of issues which again pose a question mark on the use of organized tawarruk in Islamic banking, and really puts doubt on whether the basic the legitimacy of organized tawarruk. So how can we come out of this situation? Organized tawarruk has been so prevalent in Islamic banking. There must be some way in which Islamic banking can move towards risk sharing and real economic activity, sort of strategies. From the way how I look at it, because organized work is so prevalent, there has to be sort of a short-term view and then obviously a long-term approach. So from a short-term approach, there must be some reform in the way tawarruk structure is sort of applied. Instead of using, for example, London Metal Exchanges, there's a need to develop local exchanges in the area where the bank is operating, so that these local exchanges can have strict regulations and controls around the ownership transfer, and also the verification of the quality and the location of the commodity that is being actually traded on these platforms. Furthermore, another important thing to note is that in Tawarruk, because the purchase and sale has to be done with distinct counterparties, it cannot be done to the same counterparty. So, on these exchange platforms, there must be regulations that sort of mandate that distinct entities can do this commodity trading to ensure that the transactions don't become impermissible. From a long-term point of view, we have to actually look beyond Tawarruq in order to fulfill the objectives of Sharia. And uh, since Tawarruq is used for obtaining liquidity, so for example, for interbank liquidity, there can be the Sukuk certificate program, which uses the short-term Sukuk, leading from 1 to 6 months, where Islamic banks, if they have an excess of liquidity, they can sort of buy these Sukuk certificates, and then they could sell this Sukuk certificates to other banks who actually are in need of this liquidity. And these Sukuks will be backed by actual assets, which are government assets or sovereign assets. And another way could be the use of liquidity pools. So Islamic financial institutions or central banks, they come together, they form this liquidity pool, which is backed by takaful. So this liquidity pool provides like an mutual insurance system, for the participating banks. In the case of sort of personal financing, there are alternatives in the use of salam and ijara contracts. So salam financing will involve the bank using a forward contract to buy a commodity, with the delivery of that commodity deferred at a later date. So the customer will get the liquidity that they need, and then they can do the delivery on a deferred basis. In the case of ijara, in ijara, the bank will actually get what kind of liquidity the customer needs for. So what are the needs that the customer require? So then the bank will then purchase that commodity, purchase that asset, and then rent it to the client, and then the client then can basically pay the rent back to the bank. So to conclude, my project paper presentation, we have seen that organized tawarruk, creates more debt in society and leads to excessive consumption. And because organized tawarruk has been in practice for more than 30 years, there is a need to develop alternative products. Organized tawarruk initially came in as a way to promote Islamic banking, to gain a foothold, for Islamic banking in the conventional finance space. But it has been there for since the beginning. So there's a definite need to develop better and alternative products which utilize risk sharing principles with real economic activity, so that they can also align with the maqasid al Sharia. So because the organized work is so prevalent, it won't be it won't be an easy job to sort of fix and move away from organized work completely. So I suggest a short-term and a long-term approach. So in a short-term approach, we try to reform the structure of organized tawarruk, develop local exchanges that the banks could use. And from a long-term point of view, as we phase away from tawarruk, we have alternative products in providing liquidity, such as liquidity pools, short-term sukuk, and for personal financing, we can utilize salam and ijara contracts for personal financing. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. So thank you for watching.